Welcome to English 1120, Introduction to Grammar course. In this video, we'll talk about form class words. So we're going to try to answer the question, what are form class words? What are the four main types of form class categories? And then we'll go over proofs and examples for each of these four classes. So what are form class words? We could maybe define them by contrasting them with structure class words. So form class words, another name for that is content words. And these are the words that offer the primary meaning when we're speaking English. In fact, in terms of pronunciation, when English speakers talk, they give emphasis and stress to the form class words, and they quietly or quickly say the structure class words. So if we were speaking like cavemen, I go store, right? I go to the store. We're going to hear the go store parts loudest because those are the form class words. The others are structure class words. Another difference is that form class words are what we call open class, which means we can keep adding words to this as our language develops, as we invent new things in our society, and we need names or words for them, then we use form class words. And so this means that these words are often changing form. We're adding morphemes to them. Structure class words, on the other hand, we rarely add new words to a language in structure classes. We call these closed classes. And they also rarely change form. We are not adding morphemes to them either. So structure class words, some categories are pronouns, prepositions, auxiliary verbs, determiners, qualifiers, conjunctions. These are some of the categories. So then what are form class words? Essentially the other important ones, okay, which are nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. So let's talk about identifying these words. And we're going to use some proofs. Okay, we're going to use formal proofs. And when we say formal here, what we mean is by their form, or in other words, by how the words are created with morphemes. That's why we had to study morphology last week, because we couldn't do these formal proofs if we didn't understand what morphemes were. Then the functional proof is more about how do the words function in a sentence? How do we use them in a sentence? So we will both analyze the morphemes of the word, and then we analyze how the word is used in a sentence. And those two types of proofs can help us categorize things as nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. So let's start with nouns. We could say we have things that are prototype nouns that really fit all these proofs, and others that are more peripheral. They're noun-like, they're kind of nouns, but they don't fit all of our proofs. So as we go through different examples, just think yourself, is this something that's really a core noun, like looks like a noun in all the ways, or it's something that is probably a noun because it shares most of the categories, but there's other ways that maybe it's a little bit different. So our formal proofs is that it contains a noun-making morpheme. Examples of these are things like itty, or ness, or meant, or shun. When we add it to the end of the word, that makes it a noun. That's a noun-making morpheme. Okay. And also, if it can take noun inflections, and we learned about those last week, those two noun inflections, the possessive and the plural, then that gives us evidence that it's a noun. The functional proofs are that it can be followed by an article. So a, and, the. If it can immediately be followed by that without any modifiers, okay, then it might be a noun. And if it can fit this example sentence. So the noun seems all right. So let's look at some examples. We've got the word teacher. Okay, teacher actually has a noun-making morpheme, the ER at the end. Although we've learned that this is an inflectional morpheme for adjectives and adverbs, here the same spelling and same pronunciation is a different morpheme. It looks the same, sounds the same, but it's not the same, okay, because its meaning is different. This is where we take something and we make it into a person or object that does the thing. Okay, so teach, a teacher is a thing or a person that teaches. And it can take these noun inflections. We could say teachers, okay? The teachers went to a meeting, okay? Or we could talk about the teacher's classroom. And in terms of a functional proof, okay, we have the teacher or a teacher. And it can fit this sentence. The teacher seems all right. What about table? I don't know that we would say that table contains a noun-making morpheme. I don't think that there's anything in there that we could say is a noun-making morpheme, but it can take the noun inflectional morphemes, tables, or even talk about the table's surface. And it can be followed by an article, a table, the table, and it can fit the sentence, the table seems all right. How about sadness? We've definitely got a noun making morpheme here, right? The ness. Can it take these inflections? Sadnesses. Maybe. I don't know that we would do that in English, but maybe conceptually we could think about this idea of there being multiple states of sad. And so there are sadnesses. Possessive, the sadnesses. I don't know that we could say that that sadness could possess or own something, but maybe. So it's a little bit weaker in that sense. Can it follow an article? Yes, the sadness. I experienced a sadness, maybe. Can it fit the sentence? The sadness seems all right. Yeah, I don't know that we'd say sadness is all right, but I mean, grammatically it could function. Let's talk about verbs then. If something looks like it's a verb, but it's not a verb, and so it doesn't fit all of our proofs that we're going to look at, it might be an auxiliary verb or a modal. These function along with verbs to create verb phrases. So that's something to keep in mind, and we'll talk about auxiliaries and modals a little bit later. So formal proofs, it has a verb-making morpheme. There are certain verb-making morphemes like ate, and then there's others where we add something and to the end of something in it. Like eyes, I-Z-E, that's another verb-making morpheme. Realize, for example. It can take those 4 inflections that we talked about. Present tense, present participle, past tense, past participle. It can be made into a command, or sometimes we call that imperative form, like freeze, okay, or stop. That's the command form. It can be made negative, okay, so do not, or cannot, or will not, okay, those are all ways that we could negate it. And then it could fit at least one of those sentences, okay? They must blank, or they must blank it, or they must blank good. And the reason why we have these different variations is that some verbs work as we call copula verbs, and that's the last example. Some verbs are transitive or intransitive. They can take an object or they cannot take an object. So we'll look at some examples. So we have the word negate, okay? And as we talked about, it has the ate, which is sometimes a verb-making morpheme. So it follows that. We could say she negates the sentence. Okay, so we've got she is negating the sentence. She negated the sentence, and she had negated the sentence. And in that case, the past participle and the past tense are formed the same way. Can it be made into a command? Negate. Okay. Teacher could maybe say that. I don't know why they would, but they could force you to negate. Can be made negative. Okay, he does not negate. Can it fit the sentence? Yes, they must negate it. Okay, they must negate the sentence. We can't use that second one. They must negate good. We actually have to say they must negate well. That's because negate is not a copula verb, so it doesn't work with the good. Become. Okay. I don't know. I mean, be sometimes is sometimes used with verbs. So it depends on your experience whether you consider that a verb-making morpheme. But it does take these inflections. Okay. Become, because, becomes. Okay. Becoming, became, and had become. Okay. It's an irregular verb, but it does do that. Can it be made into a command? Yes, become. And be made negative, do not become. And they must become it. Probably not, we wouldn't use it that way, but they must become good. And so become is an example of a copula verb, okay, where we're linking, or a linking verb, sometimes they call it, where we're linking the adjective at the end there with the subject of the sentence. They equals good, okay, they become good. And we'll do one more here, type. Okay, I don't know that we would say type has a verb-making morpheme, but it can take all those inflections, type, types, typed, typing, had typed. Okay. Type is a command, cannot type, will not type, okay, and they must type, or also they must type it, as in they must type the paper. Let's talk about adjectives now, okay. So adjective formal proof has an adjective making morphemes. There are some like that, ending in Y, sometimes LY, and there are full is another example. So we have some of these adjectives that have morphemes that we can recognize. And then they can take those two inflections for adjectives, the comparative ER and the superlative EST. Or functionally, they can become comparative or superlative using the words more or most. They can be qualified. So qualifiers are verbs that sometimes we talk about them being intensifiers, but they change maybe the degree of the adjective. And then an adjective, can it fit both of these slots in this sentence? Okay, the blank person seems very blank. So let's start with sweet. Okay, no adjective making morpheme that I'm aware of, but we could say sweeter and sweetest. Okay? We wouldn't really say then more sweet and the most sweet, because we could use the ER, EST, but generally, I mean, some people could do that, but that's not the regular pattern that we use in English. Can it be qualified? Somewhat sweet. Yeah, we could say the lemon was somewhat sweet. Okay? And we have our sentence here. The sweet person seems very sweet. It fits in both of those. It fits in both the attributive adjective slot and the predicative adjective slot. And we'll take a look at some why that matters, make that distinction. Happy, okay, the Y ending is sometimes one we use. I know that my spouse, she often does this, where she will take a word and add the Y at the end, turn it into an adjective, even if it's not an adjective that is commonly used. Okay. Then our inflections, happier, happiest. Okay. More happy, more happy. You know, we probably wouldn't do that because we use the inflection instead. Somewhat happy. Okay. And then our sentence, the happy person seems very happy. Selfish. Okay. Ish is sometimes an adjective making morpheme. Can we say selfisher or selfishist? No, instead we use the functional proof there. More selfish and the most selfish. And that's because it's more than one syllable and it doesn't end in an I. If adjectives are one syllable, they usually take the ER, EST. If they're two syllables, but that syllable ends in a Y, like happy, they can still take the inflections, but otherwise we use them usually with more or most. Okay, we could say somewhat selfish, and the selfish person seems very selfish. We could do that. Let's take this last one, afraid. Okay, maybe at the beginning of sometimes I think can be used as an adjective making morpheme, but that's not a one that really jumps out at people. Comparative, afraider, afraidest. No, this is a two-syllable word, so we could say more afraid or the most afraid, and somewhat afraid. Now let's take our sentence here. The afraid person seems very afraid. Okay, we could say someone seems afraid, someone is afraid, but we usually don't use afraid in the attributive slot. We don't say the afraid person. We say maybe the fearful person or the worried person or the person who is afraid or is scared. We could say the scared person maybe. But afraid is an adjective that generally we don't see in an attributive slot. And some adjectives are like that. They'll fit one or the other and not both, although most adjectives will fit both. Okay, let's talk about adverbs. Okay, formal proof has an adverb making morpheme. The most common one we're going to see is the ly, but there's also like y's, okay, at the end of a word. Sometimes word, W-A-R-D at the end, could also function sometimes that way. Can it take the comparative and superlative? Not a lot of adjectives actually do because they have to be really short in order to do that. Instead, adverbs usually use the more or most with the functional proof there. Can be qualified again. Here's another example of another qualifier, very. Okay, and then can it fit this frame sentence? The person's told the story blank. Okay, and we're describing how or when, or we're describing the description of the story. So let's take a look at some examples quickly. Okay, ly we see there. Okay, can we say quicklier, quickliest? Probably not. We would say more quickly and most quickly. We could say very quickly, and we could say the person told the story quickly. About fast. Okay, similar meaning, obviously. Adverb making morpheme, no, but we could say faster and fastest. Okay, and so we would do that probably instead of the more most. We could talk about very fast. Okay, and then it can fit the story. The person told the story fast, meaning quickly. Okay. Now, fast sometimes can be used as an adjective, but in this case, it also fits the proofs for an adverb. And some words like that in English, the same spelling, but the word can function in multiple categories without actually changing its form. And that's just one quality of certain words in English. Let's also look at soon. Okay, soon doesn't have an adverb making morpheme. Sooner, soonest, actually we probably could do that. We could talk about very soon. And then we've got our sentence here. The person told the story soon. It does might sound a little bit awkward to you. It probably needs a complement to that adverb at the end. So the person told the story soon after arriving. Or she told me the story sooner than you told me. So soon does function as an adverb, but it is a little bit different than some of the other ones we looked Okay? So we talked about form class words. Form class words are words that give the primary meaning in the sentence. They're open, meaning we can add new words to these categories as new words are invented. And they're the words and sentences that change the most with inflections and with derivational morpheme additions. There's form and categories, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. And then we went over both formal and functional proofs for each of these categories. Now, this should give you some confidence and some background so that when we meet together, you'll feel comfortable identifying words into these four categories following the types of proofs that we talked about.